says, your recording is, yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Thanks for doing
Sorry,
that.
please continue.
For those of you that are just joining us, we're asking people to share their favorite cartoon growing up or their favorite cartoon they watch now. So we got things like Robot Chicken, brilliant, by the way, Bluey, Scooby-Doo, Transformers, Super Friends. Wow, that's good stuff right there. You can watch that today. It's available everywhere. He-Man was one of my favorite. I tried watching the new one on Netflix. Not good. Just not good. I'm sorry, Netflix. You just continue to fail us. Your stock is going down. It's terrible. Anyway, I do have other favorite shows on Netflix, but I won't get on that tangent. But thanks for letting me join each of you. You may have seen me before on Arrested Development. I'm Tobias, the Never Nude. If you've ever watched Arrested Development, David Cross is the actor on there. I'm not really him, but I get accused of looking like him on a regular occasion. I've had people buy me drinks at a pub, and I've had people buy me dinner because they think I'm David Cross. It's just that's how ridiculous it's gotten. Really good to be with you. I've been on staff at Community Christian for like almost 23 years. I started working there as a small groups pastor, cut my teeth in leadership development, the multiplication of groups, and then I helped launch 5 different locations at Community. I launched one myself as a lead planter in the city of Chicago. I've been working for New Thing pretty much since the beginning. I used to direct the organization. Then I got bored with that and gave it to Patrick because he's better at it than I am. And so I work for Patrick. I am the Dwight Schrute of New Thing, which just means I'm the assistant too. I do whatever Patrick doesn't want to do himself. But really what that means is I provide leadership to really our generosity initiative is one of the big things I have. And then our communications, and Jeff and I work together on new stuff, which is the digital region that we've been working on together with New Thing. And that's how we've got connected to you guys, and super awesome to be with you. So as we think about tonight and we think about those 3 different sessions I mentioned, we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of leading a network. I myself lead a network. I lead a network here in the city of Chicago, and it's something I'll tell you more about in a bit. And this network is something that I practically participate in. I co-lead with a friend of mine, and it's really allowed for me to kind of just continue to shape and develop what we mean when we say, what's it mean to lead a network? What are the nuts and bolts with that? And so as we enter into session 3, nuts and bolts, I want to say this to you, that a network is a small group for pastors of like-minded churches that hold each other accountable to the 4 R's of New Thing. Now, if you remember the 4 R's of New Thing, maybe you heard Patrick talk about these, at least you should have. We talk about relationship, reproducing, residency, and resources. Those are the 4 R's of New Thing. But as we talk about a network being a small group for pastors of like-minded churches, certainly what that could look like in this conversation could be digital missionaries. Doesn't necessarily have to be churches. And we'll continue to flesh that out and work through that as we look to serve leaders like you to discover what it looks like to organize leaders and churches and digital missionaries into digital networks that will prayerfully pursue the multiplication of digital missionaries, the multiplication of digital churches, and multiple expressions. This has been our holding definition so far as we talk about what this looks like to do this around the world as a reproducing movement. Right now, with New Thing, I think the current stat is that we have about 675 networks around the world that are collaborating together, that are prayerfully pursuing church multiplication together, that are working on these different initiatives. And a working definition for that, again, is that it's a small group of pastors that are working together to plant churches together. Now, these churches that collaborate together, they might participate, each individual church, at a different level in different seasons for different reasons. Not every church can participate at the same level all the time when they're in a network. So the way that we talk about this, imagine each of you represented a local church. If you are in a network, everybody is level 1. All of you would be at level 1. What that means is, if we're in a network, at the bare minimum, we're going to pray for multiplication for all the churches involved. We're going to ask the Holy Spirit to inspire our churches to have the missional imagination that it takes to multiply their local church. And that's going to be just where we start at. So if you've joined our network, you're part of our network, We're going to pray for one another and pray for a movement of God that he would multiply the churches that are part of this. Everybody is level one if you're in a network. Level two would be, I'm going to participate. Now, again, please keep in mind, and I'm sure Patrick said this many times as well, this is mostly played out in physical contexts. We know that what we're talking about with each of you is what does this look like to play out in a digital context. But really what we're looking for to level two is participation. Now that could look like people being part of a new church that's being started. It could look like pennies or dollars that are being invested in that new initiative. It could also look like platform. And what that means is whatever is the easiest for a church to participate at. So a local church, the easiest thing for them might be money. For whatever reason, they have access to resources to fund something, but they don't have the people to send or the platform to give away. This has been true for us in Chicagoland, the network that I lead. I co-lead with a friend of mine, and their local church is a Reformed theological church. Sometimes a Reformed theological church will not plant churches that are non-Reformed theologically. Sometimes a Reformed church will not ordain women to become pastors. And so for them, they can't necessarily platform stories that are not Reformed and or planted by women as pastors. But they can give money to those projects. And so when I say platform, what I mean is taking a church planter, bringing them up on stage, praying for them, commissioning them, and sending them out. So their elders and their leadership has said, we're willing to financially invest in new startups that might not be Reformed, that might not be led by men only, but we're not going to platform those stories and confuse our congregation. Now that may sound strange. It is a little bit. Sometimes when you're collaborating with other churches, you come up with creative ways to approach collaboration. And so their story is that they're able to participate with pennies, but not necessarily people in platform. That's level two, when you're just going to participate in a new initiative. Level three is all of them. You're like, listen, I am so excited about this new initiative. I'm so excited about what God's doing that we want to invest people towards this. We want to invest pennies towards this, and we want to give you platform. Now, aren't you impressed by all these alliterations? There are so many things going on here. It's crazy. So what we're trying to say is that ultimately what you're trying to get to is a collaborative effort where these churches are looking each other in the eye and they're going, listen, we're going to pray for each other. We're going to support each other's initiatives and multiplication. We're going to encourage one another towards multiplication. And then at the next level, we're going to participate in some level, whatever that looks like. And again, you have to use your missional imagination, your context, your influence to think about what does that mean when it comes to the digital network? How do we participate in one another's initiatives if we're in a network together? What does that look like? But you can imagine it might be very similar to people, pennies, and platform, although there might be other things to consider in that. You're much more of an expert at this than we are based on your experience and the context that you currently work in. And then that third level is it's like you're in a poker game. You're like going all in because you're fully invested in whatever that next initiative is that another church is working on or another digital missionary is working on, that you want to help them do that. Sometimes we use the analogy that a network is not just a small group for pastors, but it's also a team for pastors and digital missionaries to work together to collaboratively multiply stuff. And the reason why we say that, just coming back to what Patrick had shared with you last week, is that we want to see a great collaboration take place. And being on a team means that ego and economics and ecclesiology are out the window. Those are not our primary conveners for how we get things done, even though those have been the primary conveners for how the church has gotten things done in North America for a long time. I mean, certainly we can name a book, a podcast, a conference, you name it, that's been given over to somebody's ego and given them plenty of platform. And we already know and are well aware of the many dark sides and shadows that can come with that. And certainly we know plenty of models that are very expensive, that cost lots of money, that do give away laptops and benefits and cell phones and provide full-time salaries and retirement plans, and have multi-million-dollar buildings that are very expensive to facilitate, which makes it difficult to multiply and collaborate and makes us territorial and can make us kind of be hoarders of what we have. And certainly we know plenty of ecclesiologies that are clunky, that are difficult to reproduce, that are hard to scale, that have slowed down collaboration and multiplication because of our commitments to our ideologies and our commitments to our theologies. And that kind of stuff has slowed down collaboration and the idea that we're on the same team. So if a network can like say, listen, we're not going to allow ego, economics, and ecclesiology to get in the way. We're going to do everything we can to pray for one another, to step into the next level of participation. And still, over time, what we're asking is that everybody that's in this network is going to fully partner at some point with at least one initiative. And then as a network, you try to figure out what's the most appropriate way to challenge that. Do you ask them to partner as a church at least once a year on a project, or 5 times a year? And just try to imagine what that could look like to challenge everybody to be friends on mission. And I think you also heard Patrick talk about this as well. It's a common phrase that we use. When we're friends on mission, we support, love, and encourage one another. And we do whatever it takes to get each other's back so that we can see new work being done within our spheres of influence. So whether we're talking about doing something that's virtual reality, or whether it's something we're talking about launching a digital church online through social media platforms or on Discord, or whether it's a digital missionary that's been empowered to live out the blessed practices in their neighborhood, and they plant a local church because of their development they received online as a digital missionary. What we're trying to get to is that our networks would genuinely love one another, that we get back to the great collaboration, that we'd really truly embrace John 17 and stop seeing only the local church when we think about multiplication, but instead see the big church when we talk about multiplication and collaboration. And so practically speaking, a network is when you have a church leader. So for example, I used to lead a church that I planted in the city of Chicago that was on behalf of Community Christian Church. It was a location of community that we started from scratch. It was my wife and I and our 3 kids, and we moved to the city. We sold our house in the suburbs. We became digital missionaries, except in person. See what I did there? Anyway, so we planted this location of community. And over time, we became a location that was established, and I built relationships with other pastors in the neighborhood. And we began to form a new network that was in the city of Chicago with churches that were collaborating together. Now, I've since handed off that church. Someone else leads that now. And I'm no longer leading a local church, but I'm still leading that network. And part of what gives me the credibility to do that is somebody who has been a church planter themselves. But at the same time, like, we don't necessarily stop people from leading networks if they're not leading a local church. Instead, what it takes is somebody who is apostolic, who is kingdom-minded, who's convening leaders towards multiplication, and someone who's fiercely loyal to seeing a movement of God through their influence and taking the time to serve these leaders. And I co-lead it with another guy who's not a lead pastor of a church. He's the executive pastor of a church. I think sometimes when we talk about networks, maybe what we unintentionally hear is that we need to be a lead pastor of a church to lead a network. That's not necessarily true. That's kind of the point I was trying to make with that. But if we can, we want to be able to organize the network with a network leader. Again, sometimes you have one network leader, and then you have 2 network leaders, like the network I lead. Even better if you have apprentice network leaders. And we'll talk about that when it comes to reproducing networks. Again, when we talk about networks, think of it like a small group. How you would multiply a small group is if you had an apprentice small group leader that you would develop and send out and start a new small group. We do a very similar strategy when it comes to networks. What small groups are to the local church, networks are to movement. And we want to continue to live out that simple practice as we multiply. So the network that I lead has about 9 churches that are connected to that network. And we meet every month, and we'll talk about those relational rhythms. But the reason why we're connected to one another is that we want to make sure that we empower each other's churches, each other's leadership. We hold each other accountable to multiplication, and that we have a lot of fun while we're doing it. I spent a lot of time with the guys and gals that are in our network, praying over them, encouraging them, supporting them, laughing with them, mourning with them when they go through challenges, really trying to do the best I can as a network leader, just like I would if I was a small group leader, to develop a genuine friendship with the people that are in my network. It makes it a lot easier to share pennies, platform, and people when you truly are friends with one another and you really do believe in each other's initiatives and believe in what you're doing. Some of you may have heard the term communitas, which is a phrase that our buddy Alan Hirsch came up with in The Forgotten Ways. I have affectionately changed the term to funitas, but the bottom line is if you're building trust and you're on mission together, that's when communitas starts to happen. That's when really powerful and amazing things can start to happen. It's when you can be spontaneous about initiatives that emerge within your communities. We were able to address COVID and underserved communities in a very significant way because of our networks that we have in the Chicagoland area. And there's a bunch of stories I can give you about that. We were also able to partner together for an initiative that we call Justice Deposits, where we were able to move assets and resources to Black-owned banks in the last several years because of our friendships on the south side of Chicago. And there's some great stories that I could tell you about that. And so when you're friends and you want each other to win, things can get much more exciting, and you might be able to actually accomplish a lot more. And you've heard us talk about inspiration and information and implementation. This is really just saying that it's really about dreaming big together. It's about sharing best practices together. It's about implementing multiplication and growth at the edges through these churches that you're working with while you're also aligned around these 4Rs. And just another visual for what we're talking about. And I'll talk about the relational rhythms that go with this. But essentially what we're trying to get to is not dissimilar to Exodus 18, which is a passage that's been used a lot in the local church when you think about church growth models. And what I liked about that particular structure from Exodus 18, if you remember the story, it's the story of Moses being approached by his father-in-law, Jethro. And Jethro's like, hey, buddy, my daughter keeps coming to me and saying, you're working long hours. Take a chill pill and raise up some leaders and like grow your span of care through some leaders. And if you remember that story, we basically have taken that and applied that simple structure of span of care to the kingdom and had tried our best to organize how we accomplish things through New Thing by raising up capable leaders that can continue to grow the spans of care of New Thing. And that's really not even the best way to say it, because it's not really about New Thing. It's really more about the kingdom. And we want to see multiplication at the edges. And we have found the best way to do that is to raise up network leaders, to raise up movement leaders that help increase the spans of care, to help continue the alignment of multiplication so that we could prayerfully see a movement of God all around the world. And so this simple structure here is what you're seeing. Is that imagine, 6 churches that are connected in one network. And now imagine these 4 networks that are part of a larger movement. And that's really allowed for us to continue to grow and expand and have more growth and multiplication at the edges. I will stop there. We're right at about 15 minutes. And I'm just going to ask if I'm going to hand it back to Jeff. I think what we decided here is that we'll have some breakout discussion on what was just shared and then come back for some Q&A, but we can flip it if you think that would help. It's up to you.
Yeah, let's do this. Let's break up into groups. I'm going to click the magic button here. And I say that. Where's my magic button? Nope, that's not it. Breakout rooms. Yeah, it's the icon right in front of me. Okay, so we're going to break up into 2 groups. We're going to do this randomly. Start process through here. Maybe what are some challenges in digital as you're listening to this? The idea of reproducing churches that grow into networks that fall under a movement. What are some challenges? What are some things that we need to work through and contextualize to make this work digital? Or are there challenges to that? And so I'll throw that question in the global chat, but let's work through that. Let's say let's do 10 minutes. Some of you are new, some of you may not know each other from the last conversation, and so take some time, a couple minutes worth of introduction, and then work through the questions. What are some challenges working through this digitally? Okay, I'm going to press this and hopefully open the rooms, and you guys are good to go. See you back here in 10 minutes.
being recorded.
Wow, I've got cameras back. I can see everybody.
All right. Well, it looks like our group's here. The next group's coming. I always forget, like at the end of the counter, my mind, it forces everybody over, but I actually have to click the buttons, and so I need to accommodate for that time. Anyway, Shane, sorry you got kind of rushed at the end.
No, that's fine. I think I got everything out. I mean, everybody understood what I said.
I was curious about the Hughes, kind of hearing about some of their social media work. That's interesting to me. I don't know if they want to take a couple seconds.
Go for it.
Was there anything in particular that you were?
Yeah, like what does that look like? Like what is your what is your church just give you a picture of what your church is doing, what it looks like in the day-to-day?
Yeah, we've been working on the last I'd say about 18 months, looking at social media as this big open sea of wonderful people who don't know they're going to get caught yet. And so we use a lot of content as casting the net, so to speak, and through just inspirational posts, messages, stuff like that.
We do a lot of live videos.
Do a lot
daily,
of live videos,
yeah.
Gotcha.
a lot of daily stuff. I don't know how many videos we have up. It's a lot. While we've been working on behind the scenes, how to actually move people from being anonymous. I love what Shane said in our group, because that's exactly some people they don't want to be known, and so as we've learned over the last 18 months, lots of people are watching that you don't even know they're watching because of the way social media is set, especially Facebook has set up. They could watch your service, watch you talk, read your post, and have zero interactions with you. So we're discovering that those people that take a step forward, they connect in a relationship very, very fast, because they've already been spending that time. I guess the great word we could use is vetting us from a distance. And so we've been working on now is how to move people from the various places like Facebook, all our social media endeavors, to an actual community platform off of social media, and that would be our focus of our discipleship piece, moving people now to doing what we're doing right here.
But not leaving social media.
Oh no, we'll never
Yeah.
leave social media. 3.7 billion people a month use social media across the world. And so we want to tap into that as long as we can.
Hey, have you guys seen this Be Real social media? Thank you very much, Eric Metcalf, for connecting me with a thing. It's a new social media. Go check it out. Be Real. Write it down. I don't know. Maybe it's worthwhile. Maybe it's not.
One of the fastest growing social media apps right now.
Well, Twitter's got to come back. I have a feeling.
Yeah,
I think
turns
there's about
out.
$44 billion worth of comeback coming soon. For that.
Don't call it a
Hey,
comeback.
I got Twitter for free. I didn't have to spend billions of dollars.
Oh my. Okay. Hey, so let's start. I was hanging out in group 2 and just love some of the challenges. There's some challenges to this. So let's unpack here for about 10 minutes. What were we seeing? What were some challenges as we were looking to do this with the network? What are some challenges in doing networks digitally? Group 1, room 1, the room I was not in, Eric's room. Why don't y'all go first?
Yeah, JMO.
Okay, so one of the challenges that I think it is hard is the definition of church. So one of the things is the idea of the New Thing Network is reproducing churches. That's great. Reproduction, awesome. What's a church? So especially in the digital space, that can be really fuzzy, what a church actually is, how it behaves. It can be very different in its expression, probably more types of variation than you even get in the physical church. So having that kind of freedom is what we got from Eric, that it can be kind of anything. That's a good thing for us. Where it could get difficult is with others trying to understand what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because they're like, what's this?
Yeah. No, I totally recognize that. You know, and for me, for Digital Church Network, and the reason we're with the new thing is the amount of contextualization and freedom we have to define what that is beautiful. Which is why we even pivoted and started using the language digital missionary, because some of the people who are
Yeah.
doing this, you know, I know we'll have this running hair joke with Dr. Harris. Is he a church or not? He says he's not, but he's operating like he is. Jake's the same way. He says he is, but it's like in quiet rooms. And so, like, you know, even like the digital missionary, we want there to be, but you're right, that does offer some confusing aspects. Group room one, one more. What was one more challenge or yeah, challenge, obstacle? What else did you guys come up with?
We talked about more than it being an obstacle, just kind of an opportunity to kind of look at how you structure networks. That it wouldn't have to be something that is based on proximity, but it could be something based on platform or even language or cultural context, or, you know, there are a lot of ways that you can group people into networks. So digital just kind of opens up a whole new realm of possibilities and opportunities. So we didn't really see that as a challenge, more as, oh, look at what's possible.
Yeah.
So.
And that once again comes back to that freedom for contextualization and my gosh, I mean, we're talking about we've got several metaverse digital, or excuse me, virtual reality pastors in here. And let's be honest, 2 years from now, even that technology is going to revolutionize what's possible. And some of the things that we're even dreaming of today are going to be completely different once Elon Musk drops his $44 billion into that world like everybody else is. And so it's going to be very interesting, the potential of what can be. Okay, hey, room two. Who wants to share maybe some of the obstacles we were talking about? Flat Cap, you had a great example right off the bat, real life. You want to share yours?
Sure. I talked about if we're digital, there's technology issues that come up. Yesterday, I tried to jump on and watch the roundtable, and my phone wouldn't connect with it. Don't know why. I kept hitting the live button. I couldn't get on. I couldn't do it. And then when we just went to the breakout rooms, I had black screen for everybody that was there. So sometimes you have those things that happen. And then what do you do with them? How does that interfere with your ability to be in a network or to reach out with limited time and space that people have?
Yeah. It's and especially as you're going more metaverse and with the new technology that's rolling out, early adopters, there's always going to be a price to that and a failure rate to go with it. Thank you that Resi is now engaging and streaming into the metaverse. I can sleep better at night. But aside from that, yeah, listen, there's always going to be obstacles and challenges. What was another one from room two?
Well, one of the ones that I mentioned is the is the lack of trust for some planter, just based on the context that they're coming out of and their experience with, in some cases, dysfunctional leadership, toxic leadership, micromanagement, or whatever, and just some of the baggage that they're carrying from that, and being jaded with some aspects of their experience with the church. And so those kind of things can lead to some hesitancy about joining a network or submitting to mentorship or even looking for mentorship. And so there can just be some unhealth there that's preventing them from making a step like this that would help them actually be healthy.
So yeah, hurt people, and hurt people attract people that can hurt people. And so I think that there's maybe multiple layers to that. I know that this is a topic that's, Chris, is close to your heart. I've had a number of conversations with Flat Cap on that, and excited to even start to bake some of this ideology into the network, because we don't want to be we don't want to be hurt. We don't want to be fried. We need to care for ourselves so that we can care for others.
Purveyors of more trauma.
Yes. And ironically, I'm the guy who needs a break, and I've COVID. So listen, I confess right now, I'm probably not the best one to have that conversation, but definitely I'll say that with an open heart, and say that yeah, that's something that we need to look into and care for. Awesome. So hey, I'm going to hand it back to Eric, and who has that awesome blur background right now, which is rolling really well. Zoom's looking good for you, my friend.
All
But let me
right.
hand it back to you. By the way, every time I see you now, I will think of the scene with in the shower, sobbing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not a picture. I like. I don't need that in my head all the time. So thank you for installing it right there.
Yeah, this might be the only time if you Google never nude that you won't get something naughty on your screen, but it's pretty funny if you don't know who David Cross is from Arrested Development. We'll move on. Hey, all right, so another 15-minute snapshot here. We'll give you guys a little bit of stuff to chew on, think about. Thanks for letting me take the mic again, Jeff, appreciate that. We're in session 4, how to start a network. That is a thing. You know, we talk about starting small groups or starting a new ministry team in a local church context. Well, what if we could use similar strategic thinking when it comes to starting a network? As I mentioned before, we have just over 600 networks around the world that have anywhere between 4 to 6 churches in them that are working together to collaboratively plant churches together. And again, certainly as we think about the digital church network, maybe it's 4 digital missionaries that are working together to multiply more digital missionaries. This is us working with you to kind of figure out how to scale the language, how to take the principles and not the program, and accomplish the mission together if we could. So imagine if you could, though, with me, as we think about what New Thing does, what we're trying to do is we're looking for an apostolic person of peace that is dreaming big. And they're imagining that what if God could use me with others to accomplish something significant to reach people that aren't currently being reached. And I'm trying to very intentionally use generic language that could be any subculture through any platform, in any context, in any language, that God might use that person to do that. And so what we're trying to do is to identify what we call movement makers, that potential movement maker, come alongside them, help take that dream that they have and even expand it to a bigger dream as they work with other leaders to accomplish something significant. Now, those leaders can be leaders of churches, they could be digital missionaries, they could be, you name it. Let's stop trying to explain all the different options of what it could be and just say, you know, what if we're other people who are thinking and dreaming just like us? And if they had some time working with other leaders like you, that maybe they would see that vision and be able to grow it in a more significant way. Now, you may have heard Patrick talk about the movement system. Our movement system is something that we give away to leaders like you, like you're experiencing right now. You're in this experience. You're in the Reproducing Network Catalyst. We provide cohorts for disciples, leaders, churches, networks, and movements. This Reproducing Movement Catalyst has really allowed for us to work in a lot of places in a very short period of time. And what we do is we identify a potential movement maker, we meet them over Zoom, we build a relationship with them, we see if God is leading us to work together, we come to their city or to their country, they pull together like-minded churches together with them as they're an apostolic leader who's looking at kingdom over castle, and we meet with them in a room together over the course of a year or so, and we collaborate with those churches to launch new networks. We used to, before COVID, we had about 85 of these events a year globally. When COVID hit, we had to kind of pivot like most organizations and think about how we do things more intentionally digitally, which probably was God's way of us becoming even more open to what it looks like to partner with Digital Church Network, which is awesome. A couple quick stories of how this has played out. We were able to work with a leader in Albania. Again, think potential movement maker. He was a church planter who planted in Tirana, Albania. Who here's been to Albania? Anybody? I want to see. Raise your hand if you have been. No? All right, well, Albania is a wonderful country. It's beautiful. I've been there. This leader, Altin Kita, and his buddy, Kadis Bakali, They're both church planters, wonderful guys. We went there and we ran a reproducing movement catalyst with them, where they pulled together like-minded churches that were dreaming of a movement of God in Albania. If you're not familiar with the landscape of Albania, it's less than 1% evangelical Christian. I think their stat is 1/3 of 1%. And their dream, as one of the guys had grown up Muslim, was to reach the Muslim population through their new church plant in Tirana, which again is the capital of Albania. The Balkan nations have a long history of oppression. They used to be run by the Soviet Union. Communism was rampant there, and it wasn't easy for them to find their way back to God, but they did become Christ followers. And they imagined, what if we planted a bunch of churches? And what if there were other churches that wanted to do this? And so we went there, we traveled there. This is about 5.5, 6 years ago. We had about 70 leaders in the room that day. And that reproducing movement catalyst organized into networks, like what we're attempting to do with each of you. And these networks over time formed into about 6 networks of churches that collaboratively planted churches together. They planted over 70 churches in the course of 5 years. This is in a region that's less than 1% evangelical Christian. And they were going the traditional route, good old fashioned brick and mortar churches. So 70 brick and mortar churches is what they were starting in the course of 5 years. Really remarkable stuff. I mean, honestly, shocking, the results. And so what we found was, if you can find like-minded leaders who understand what we're talking about here, you can excel multiplication when you get in a room together, either virtually or in person, to hear from God together, to dream big together, and to form friends on mission. Sometimes we say family on mission, that really has each other's back. Some really exceptional things can happen. That's in Albania. We've done this all over the world. Let me share a story of being in Chicagoland. So we ran the Reproducing Movement Catalyst in a very similar way. So think here in the Chicagoland area, and we were able to launch our new thing, Chicagoland movement. We got some like-minded churches together, Community Christian Church, the church of which I'm a part. Also, Dave Ferguson is lead pastor, John Ferguson is co-founding pastor. And John and I began to work with a couple of churches. And we said, hey, what if we got in a room together, we heard from God together, we dreamed big together, and we see what God could do through us as pastors and as churches. Over time, a few more churches joined this cause. We formed some new networks through that process. We were able to organize into 5 networks that were collaboratively planting churches together. In 3 years, we were able to see God help us work through planting 35 new churches together in the Chicagoland area. Our big dream now is to plant 70 churches in the next 3 years. And we gather regularly to hear from God together in the Chicagoland movement. We really do believe that we're friends on mission. And frankly, it's been quite a bit of a surprise to me how it's played out. It's been really exciting. And here's what I mean by that. So I told you earlier that my wife and I and our 3 kids, we moved to the city to start a new church. Now, what you may not be able to see or tell about me is that I'm kind of a hip dude. Like, I'm almost 50, but I'm really cool. And so when I planted my church in the city, I thought, you know what, we're going to plant a hip, cool church, and we're going to be better than every church around the neighborhood. Now, listen, I grew up in New Thing. I grew up at Community. I've been a Kingdom guy for as long as I can remember, but I had this stupid thought in my head that kept coming back all the time. I'm going to plant a hip church to reach hip people and young leaders, and nobody's going to do church as cool as we do. Because I just had this weird dysfunction, and maybe you can relate to this. There's like this competitive nature in you that you're just not willing to admit it, but I'm just going to say I was like that. And so when I came into the city, I was all arrogant, and I thought I was going to do it better than everybody else. And so when I planted across the street from another church that had been there for over 100 years, I used to make fun of that church. And I used to talk about how we're going to do it better than them, and we're going to take the young leaders and young people and all the resources. And I'm just being honest, trying to be helpful to each of you as leaders. Certainly you're competitive. Certainly there's things that you struggle with. And maybe you tell yourself sometimes that you preach better than this other preacher, or that you do programming better than this other church does, or that denomination is terrible at this and I'm better at that. So that competitive nature, that ego gets in the way sometimes, doesn't it, for us as leaders? And so for me, that was kind of going on in the back of my head. And I didn't know it was even happening until I felt really challenged to start a network through this Chicagoland movement. And what was interesting is, over time, the church that I used to make fun of and talk about being better than is in my network now. This church that I thought for some reason I was better and we were better and what we were doing was better, ended up becoming like some of my closest friends in the city of Chicago over time. And it came through the conviction of the mission. It came through the conviction of kingdom over castle. Do I really believe that? Can I really live that out? Can I share life with the people that I used to say silly things about and have terrible thoughts of? Can I really get to a place where I pray for them, or I partner with stuff that they're about, where we participate in these different initiatives? And the answer is absolutely yes. And it's been really exciting. The second story I'll tell you about Chicagoland is we have a pastor that's from the South Side that's in my network. If you're not familiar with Chicagoland, in the city of Chicago specifically, there's about 3 million people who live in the city of Chicago. It's one of the most segregated cities in the country, next to Milwaukee and Detroit. And the city of Chicago, the north side is white, the west side is brown, and the south side is black in terms of ethnicities. It's just very segregated. And it's a really unfortunate thing. So the network that I lead, we were really intentional and strategic about inviting churches that were from different parts of the city and not doing it by geography, because you could see where that would be a challenge for us. That would create these very monochrome networks that may never collaborate on projects when the city desperately needs that. And so we were strategic about inviting pastors and church leaders from other parts of the city. And so my network has a couple Southside church planters that are in my network. They're African-American gentlemen, and they're awesome. And they've become deep friends of mine. And what was really exciting is we had a collaborative church planting project, level 3 partnership, where there was money given and leaders given and prayer given from our Southside churches to invest in some North Side church plants that are located in Chicago Police Department neighborhoods. Friends, that stuff doesn't happen by accident. That happens when people hear from God together, they pray together, they're encouraged by one another, they support one another, they begin to develop trust over time, and really amazing stuff starts to take place. And what happens is when you tell those stories, and we've told it plenty of times, it inspires other leaders to try the same thing. It inspires other churches to go, maybe we should participate in this kind of stuff. What's that look like? And slowly, gently, cautiously, prayerfully, trust starts to happen and movement starts to take place in a city and a region. And we can see this stuff happen digitally over time as well, where it's like, oh my gosh, like this stuff's actually super fun. And John 17 is actually starting to happen. And this friends on mission, family on mission stuff can start to become real. And I have story after story of those kinds of examples where it's like this kind of shocking collaborative effort where you move from, not only being friends on mission, but being family on mission for the kingdom of God. And I think I've been surprised, like you've heard me use this phrase, but apostolic person of peace really has been a very effective tool for us. If you think of Luke chapter 10, where Jesus sends out the 72, and he sends them out in pairs, which is it's a bit of a tangent, but it's another great example of apprenticeship. Why did he send them out in pairs and not by themselves? It's something worth wrestling with, and how the power of apprenticeship and co-leading, and Jesus sending them out in pairs. He could have covered more ground by sending them out individually, but he sent them out in twos. So wrestle with why he did that and think through why that's important. But what I was really wanting to reference is he says, go into to each home, and if they welcome you, then step in. If they don't, kick the dust off your feet and move on. As you think about scaling the work that each of you are doing, consider what it looks like to look for an apostolic person of peace. As you think about multiplying networks, and as you think about multiplying movements, who are the people in your sphere of influence that understand the kingdom of God, and they listen to this vision and they go, oh man, I so badly want to be a part of that. And I want to help others experience what we're talking about when it comes to multiplying networks. And so we talk about looking for potential movement makers, leaders that understand kingdom over castle, are the kinds of leaders that we're talking about, apostolic persons of peace. So starting a network, let me just back up and close up on this session. We are doing this with you, this Reproducing Network Catalyst. I'm also doing one on June 9th here in Chicagoland. And what I'm doing on June 9th, I've sent out 19 different individual invitations to friends of mine who lead local churches in Chicagoland. And what I've said to them is, I would love for you to come alongside of what we're doing, and we want to serve you, and ask if you would consider being a part of our Reproducing Network Catalyst training in an effort to launch more networks in the city of Chicago. And we've invited them to this one-day experience to walk them through what it looks like to lead a network, with the hopes that they'll do that. And it's essentially, it's similar to what we're doing with each of you. Like, what if we could launch a bunch of networks that would get leaders together, that would collaborate on new initiatives and new projects together? And it continues to be just a wonderful way for us to get leaders to be thinking about this kind of stuff, to equip them on how to do that, to inspire them towards the direction of that. And when it comes to forming new networks, it could be taking in existing churches that want to multiply. It could be taking in new church planters that want to plant a new church. It could be taking in people that are digital missionaries that want to expand their disciplines of reaching people who are far from God, and then maybe over time might establish a church or reach more people who are far from God. It could be as creative as we can come up with. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is, how do we start these networks? Well, we do it by working with leaders like you and helping you achieve that. So, Jeff, I think what we're supposed to do is continue into the next session based on the schedule, but we could pause for some Q&A if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. Is that okay? Okay, you've got the schedule better than I do. You comfortable time-wise with that?
Yes, sir.
What questions do y'all have? Kind of listening. Listen, we covered, inviting others into the conversation. We covered persons of peace in digital and metaverse space, which is a phenomenal concept. What questions do you all have?
Eric, how did you convene? How did you know who those 19 guys were going to be?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. So think local church again. So imagine your local church that you're participating in there, or your digital fam, and think about the people that you know. So a lot of the people that I invited were already either connected in a network here in Chicagoland, or I had a relationship with them from doing stuff here in the city and in the Chicagoland area for as long as I have. So they are personal invitations. There were a couple leaders, potential leaders, that we have spent time with them in the past, but they haven't been connected with what we're currently doing. So it's almost like a re-invitation or a new invitation. But most of them were in our networks and people that we already had a relationship with. Yeah. I was trying to think if there's something else I wanted to add to that. I mean, usually what's interesting is what you'll find as you become more and more familiar with this language, as you might continue to play this out as a potential network leader for DCN, you start to understand what type of person makes sense to invite into apprenticeship, and what type of person it takes to lead a network. And I keep using the term apostolic person of peace. That is a bit strategic. It's really somebody who catches a vision for how to raise up leaders, how to multiply leaders, how to think in terms of scale, understands how to pastor other leaders, and how to pour into them so that things continue to grow and multiply. But good question, Jason.
There's an interesting trend that I've seen. Trend may be too early of a word, but I feel like I've had this conversation 3 or 4 times with people that are running or are thinking about starting a digital church, and they're realizing, oh, I don't want to run a church. I really want to run a network, because the leaders are growing, are elevating. They're realizing for them the discipleship's more of multiplying people to create these churches out there. Chesley's one of those stories. Those of you that know Chesley, honestly, I've even started having some of those conversations with Jate. Many of you know Jate, and he's growing. Jate is the kind of most recently has been the guy that just within this past week is starting to wrestle with this idea of, hey, I thought I was doing a church, but the deeper, the bigger this thing gets, the more that I realize I can't connect with all these people individually. I almost need to grow to this place of being a network and starting to multiply opportunities underneath me to keep these the relationships small. Jade's hitting a bumper where he's got 3,000, 4,000, maybe it's five, it's 3 to 5,000 somewhere in there on Twitch. He's got 1,500 in Discord, and he's like, it's too big. He can't manage it all, and so he's trying to figure out how to reproduce smaller, and that's getting him into this place almost of being a network, because now as he's reproducing smaller, the smallers have different contextualizations, different audiences on their own, and they're trying to multiply in. And so, like, for digital to be effective, it's not masses we're reaching, it's individual conversations. And I totally see that being effective with the people who are doing it, and treating it almost like this network, this apprenticing, always ready to spin something off. Like, a bad analogy from the 80s. It's like Gizmo. Squirt water on it, it's just ready to pop. It's a Gremlin reference, by the way, if you're not. Okay, I appreciate the fake laughter. Come on, it's COVID brain. But that's really what I totally see us doing here, is getting ready at the network level to start to spin off some gizmos and hope they don't eat food after midnight, because that would be bad. Okay, analogy totally broke down. What other questions? Five more seconds and we'll roll on. All right. Eric, you're up.
Yeah, I mean, just to affirm what Jeff just shared, and then I'll move in to the next session here. I mean, really, what we're talking about is APEST here is what we're talking about. And oftentimes, let's be honest, I mean, and you can relate to this, I'm sure, if you find yourself in the apostolic or even the prophetic or evangelistic, the apes generally get bored in the local church because they don't feel challenged to lead in the way that they feel God's called them to lead. So the apostolic, the prophetic, and the evangelistic are like, they hit a ceiling in the local church sometimes. And so what we're talking about here is multiplication in a way that gives them platform, and they get very excited because they feel called to that. And I say that as somebody who on the APEST, I would say I'm apostolic and evangelistic. And I felt that in the local church all the time, which is why I've been a part of 5 different startups. And fortunately, I'm part of a church that embraces that, gets excited about leaders who are wired that way, and celebrates our team at Community being very involved with new things. So that's always been a wonderful blessing for me to be a part of a church like that. And so when we talk about network multiplication, it can be a very exciting thing for people in your spheres of influence to be engaged in this stuff. It can make them go, wow, there's nothing wrong with me. I thought there was something wrong with me because I got bored when I showed up at a service every week. So I just encourage you, continue to recruit and refine and define what that looks like for DCN.
I have a question.
Please.
Now that you're ready to move on, I have a question.
Sorry, you're fine. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I remember sitting at the Sticky Teams conference at North Coast several years ago. And in a breakout session, one of the guys said that if you have a person on your team who has a need for apostolic expression, and that need is not being met, they're going to pick your leadership apart and be overly critical of you as a leader. And part of that comes from what you're just talking about. Like there's an agitation, there's an unsettling, and they just find fault with everything. And they really need to get out and express this apostolic side of them. And I would venture to say that some of us in this group have had that, where we were a part of a context. And matter of fact, like one of your slides was talking about it. Like there is this unsettling, this like, we got to get out there and do something. Like this is not it. There's this frustration. How do we help pastors identify these people on their teams so that there is a smoother and earlier transition of them into the purposes of God for them, instead of, so we can kind of shorten this season of, I got to get out of here, but I don't have an opportunity, so I'm just going to blow up stuff, and you know, or sit here and just get mad, or just whatever. How do we help? Because I think you know, some of us would say some of the evangelists or other APES people are out in the harvest, like they're not even saved yet, they're out there, right? And so with that same principle, some of the planters, they're not in the digital space yet. Like they haven't found their lane. They're still already planted in a context, and it's unhealthy. How do we help pastors identify some of those people so they can present an opportunity to them and say, you know what I think, what might be happening with you? I've been noticing a pattern in our staff meetings with some of your comments, or some of your performance now is not the way it was when you first got this job, and you're still an awesome person, but things are a little weird right now. Like I think there's something to that.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, sir. I appreciate your comments and questions in that. I think that is a common challenge for churches, especially if they don't have that apostolic ethos within their church. And it can still be true, right? Even in those churches. I think that, what was the name of the book? Church Smart by Peyton Jones. He talks about apostolic leaders. If you haven't read his book, it's a wonderful book, fun to read too. But he talks about Petrine and Pauline apostles. And he says a Petrine as an apostle is one who can innovate from within the organization and send out people. I've heard the term entrepreneur is another way to describe that type of person. You might argue I'm an entrepreneur in some ways, because I've been at the same church for 22 years. And I've been very engaged with New Thing almost the entire time as a person who's been fiercely loyal, but also multiplied from within the organization and out. The second, the Pauline apostle, is somebody who starts something, releases it, and then moves on. Starts something, releases it, and moves on. Maybe some of you can relate to being that kind of leader. So that entrepreneur is harder for an organization to keep, because they're always like going out and starting something else, going out and starting something else. But I think part of it is it's a DNA thing, right? I mean, if the local church or the organizations that you lead affirm, acknowledge, and get excited about leaders like that, and then give simple systems for them to grow in that, sky's the limit. I mean, then those leaders don't feel frustrated, they feel inspired, and they feel engaged to be a part of what you're doing. I think part of the issue for multiplication in North America and in Western Europe and in Oceania, part of the issue is that we're quite territorial, we're quite ego-driven, and we're quite happy with our financial models and our ecclesiologies. It makes it really hard for us to multiply and come alongside those kinds of leaders. It's hard for us to imagine what that even looks like sometimes, especially, and that's not to mention how the African-American church feels about that, and how the Latino church feels about that, because they've struggled with resources. And so they tend to be more territorial, more familial focused, and almost feels like you're breaking up the Black church if you multiply, or you're breaking up the Latino church if you're trying to multiply. I would say DNA and culture is probably the biggest issue, and then having simple systems that allow for people to step in very easily, and use those giftings. But it's a long conversation that I'd love to continue, but I'm going to move right into the next section.
Sure. Yeah, thanks,
if that's okay. But I love your question, man, and I love this conversation. If you have you read the book 5Q by Alan Hirsch? I definitely recommend that as a resource in this conversation.
Okay.
It's a wonderful book unpacking the APEST and Ephesians 4, and he does it in a very thought-provoking way. So
nice. Okay.
So it's called 5Q is the name of the book.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, friends. Session 5: How to lead a network. So practically speaking, you have like 4, 6, 10, 12 churches in a network, and the question is, what do you do? What do you do at that time when you have those lead pastors or somebody from their team or them and their team who are coming on to these network calls, or if you're meeting in person, what happens during that time. Sometimes you might spend time on what we call the RPMs. This is where you're checking in. You might have language for that for yourselves. But a check-in is like, how are you doing relationally? How are you doing physically? How are you doing mentally? And how are you doing spiritually? And you're just giving people a place to talk about that. Because let's be honest, as pastors and leaders, we don't have a lot of places for that sometimes. And so maybe the network is where that can happen. You could also have just a very simple agenda, right? You could celebrate wins. You have some accountability time. You discuss challenges. What are some action items you can take together as a network? How can you pray for one another? And then what are some things you can update them on? Another resource that we have is our global leadership community, which meets 6 times a year. And we have leaders from all over the world who participate in this. And it's awesome. If you go to newthing.org, you can go to it if you'd like. The next one is on June 2nd. And this is just a gathering of leaders to be inspired, but our networks participate in this if they choose to. It's an open place for anybody to participate in. And out of that, we actually develop a curriculum that gets built out of that. So think of it this way, like in a local church, you have a large group, small group format. Alpha is a very popular curriculum for this. They play a video from Nikki Gumbel, and then they discuss it in their small groups. So global leadership community, the theme this year is activate. And we take that and we turn it into a network curriculum. And this last month's discussion was the makers of movement, reproducing leaders, part 1. And we got to hear from a leader in Africa. Her name's Faith. And she shared what she's doing to the church that she's a part of. And then we were able to capture that and share that and make that available through our mighty network, New Thing community. And so a network could use that as a guiding time. They also could use what we call our 5 coaching questions. And these are just very simple coaching questions. How are you doing? Where are you winning? What are your challenges? How are you addressing those challenges? And how can I pray for you? You can kind of just see here that we provide lots of different tools, resources, and ways to think about that time. But essentially what we're trying to do is just continue to celebrate all that God's doing by commissioning new initiatives, new projects, new churches being started. And our network that I lead, we commissioned a couple of church planters over Zoom, and it was super fun. It was just a fun way to be able to pray for them, encourage them, bless them, be excited about what they're doing. It's a chance for us to celebrate our scorecards. Where are we winning? What are some new initiatives that we can get behind? What are some things that are happening that we're proud of? And it's really just saying, hey, we're on the same team together. What's it look like for us to live this out? Now, a phrase that you'll hear us use quite often as we talk about what really makes New Thing work are our relational rhythms. And a rhythm is a strong, regular, repeated pattern of movement. And New Thing has a number of relational rhythms that helps keep this thing simple, scalable, and allows for many people to participate. You heard me just mention one of these relational rhythms, and that's global leadership community. It's 6 times a year. Anybody can participate in it, but our family participates in it too. And it's really just a way for us to keep leaders engaged, keep them excited about what we're doing together, and let them get a few kind of key moments of training if they could. One relational rhythm I'll focus on is the network leader that meets, and I'll just move my screen here a little bit, a network leader that meets with their network once a month. So what that means is that this network that I co-lead with my friend, Jonathan Masters, we have on calendar the 2nd Thursday of every month at 11 a.m. to 11:45 that we meet with our network over Zoom. And that relational rhythm, the way I talk about it is, it's like small group. We meet every Thursday, 2nd Thursday, of the month at 11 a.m., regardless of who shows up. And so if it's just Jonathan and I on the call, that's what's going to happen. Because we're just going to keep that rhythm in place no matter what. We ask our networks to meet monthly because we're trying to keep the relational rhythm high enough that the trust gets built so that we can encourage one another, support one another, and jump in with each other and help each other to accomplish the mission together. So monthly is the goal for the networks to meet. The network leader then meets one-on-one regularly with those in their network. Now, the reason why it says regularly, it's whatever frequency makes sense. Like a small group leader of a small group, your frequency with the people in your group is a bit of an art. For some of you, it might be a science, like you put a repeating time on your calendar to ping somebody or to meet with somebody. But essentially what you're trying to do is to gauge how people are feeling in the network. Are they engaged? Are they not engaged? Are they participating? Are they not participating? How are they doing? How are they feeling as a leader? How's their church going? How's their activity as a digital missionary, etc. Another relational rhythm is that a network leader meets one-on-one regularly with an apprentice network leader. So again, multiplication, right? So how are we doing at multiplying new networks? Well, we do that by apprenticing network leaders. Well, are you having one-on-ones with that apprentice? How are you helping them take their next step as an apprentice network leader, not just in the skills that you're asking them to do, but also with them as an individual and helping them grow as a Christ follower, as somebody who might be leading a local church or somebody that's being developed as a digital missionary. Relational rhythm number 4 is a network leader meets one-on-one or huddles every 6 to 8 weeks with their movement leader. All right, so what do I mean by that? Let's go back to this little structure here. This is our scaled approach at helping us reach, develop, and grow each of the movements that we're participating in. So if we have a movement leader that's meeting with their network leaders, then those network leaders are meeting with their churches as they huddle together and as they meet with those leaders one-on-one. And that frequency is anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. Now, as I continue through these relational rhythms, what each of you needs to wrestle with as we talk about this is what's it mean to do this in your context, and what frequencies need to be adjusted based on what you're trying to accomplish as you hear from God together, as you imagine what it looks like for the digital church network to function. Relational rhythm number 5 is networks and movements gather together 3 or 4 times a year in order to plant churches together. So I will illustrate what I mean by that by showing you just briefly our New Thing Chicagoland website. So we, as a movement, consists of about 5 networks. Those networks are led by network leaders, and these network leaders gather our networks together 3 or 4 times a year. At a Chicagoland movement, we have Grant Skelton speaking at this one. If you don't know Grant, he's a wonderful leader who is going to help us focus on how to reach young leaders, how to have younger church planting leaders, and how to reach young people as we see the average age of churches going up in North America. So we're having Grant come speak on that subject here in Chicagoland at our Chicagoland movement gathering. And movement for us is language that we use to describe those 4 or 5 networks that are working together to plant churches together in the Chicagoland area. And that rhythm is in place in an effort to keep the relationships high, but also keep the vision high for what we're trying to accomplish, which is to prayerfully see a movement of new churches started in the Chicagoland movement. And then the last relational rhythm is really mission critical as well, because this is when you gather leaders like you to dream big together and to hear from God together in a unique way that maybe not everybody needs to participate in. So you can imagine what DCN would benefit from is some form of retreat that might be annually or biannually, where you're gathering these leaders like yourself together to specifically think about how do we increase the impact of DCN? How do we grow this awesome region or movement to reach even more people around the globe? And it's where you really begin to kind of dream big together, hear from God together, build a strategic plan together, anywhere from finances to teammates to strategic plans that you may not currently have in place. And that stuff can be really awesome. In fact, our friends in Africa, our sub-Saharan African team, they just held their annual retreat that they do with their movement and network leaders. And I want to share with you real quick screen share. They posted in our New Thing community. They held their training. Maybe I missed it. Here it is. Yeah. See, Bishop Oscar is sharing with them just another kind of visual for what I'm talking about. And he's talking with these leaders. And I can't remember how many they had. And it looks like they didn't put the stat in here, but this just happened recently. Pretty exciting stuff. All right, so relational rhythms. It's an important part of how we get things done. And sometimes what I say to people, and I think you guys of anybody would understand this, like the more relational rhythms you have, the more regular they are, the more outcomes you'll see. That's just a fact. We're not a denomination. We're not a heavily funded, overstaffed organization. We're a lean, mean punk rock band machine that's trying to get the mission done with limited resources. And so our most valuable commodity is relationships. And that's really how we've operated for a very long time. And we want to continue to do that. And so the relational rhythms is really how we make deposits and how we continue to grow the movement in a really unique, fun, and relational way. So can't emphasize that enough. Jeff, I'm done with this part, unless I missed something that maybe you've heard me say or Patrick say in the past, or if you want to add anything, brother.
No, listen, no, thank you for that, Eric. The key here is the numbers, the percentages, the times, everything that you just heard is up for contextualization. Whether we follow verbatim, what needs to get adjusted, what needs to get contextualized for each network or each environment. You guys are the alpha group. We are experimenting with this, and so it's up for conversation towards that. And I think some of you shared some of those concerns earlier. Once again, it's up for conversation. Let's work it through. Let's experiment. For me, the heart is we need to find a model that's scalable, and so I want to see that scalability happen. And if we're having too high of a standard that it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. There's an aspect of this, and I hear this more and more, even from outside. And I was talking with Patrick and Eric this morning. There is an aspect where we want to get together physically, and we're trying to figure out the avenue to make that happen. There's a couple different things on the table. It'll be in the fall. If we do gather together physically to do something, that's optional. I understand. Honestly, I tried to buy a plane ticket from Miami to Kansas City to do something for another organization I work with, and that plane ticket cost $1,000. Yeah, to fly from Miami to Kansas City cost $1,000. Welcome to the new normal. So traveling physical, it's going to have its limitations, and I'm not forcing anyone to, but it is going to be an optional thing that we'll do, and would love to gather together at some point, and hopefully we'll communicate it with enough time that we're able to get the cheap plane tickets without paying the premier pricing for that. Who would have thought Kansas City was such an important destination? I don't know. Another conversation. But the heart of this is we are wanting to figure out how to get this to multiply out. I don't even know what time it is. So you're done with your script, Eric? There's no
I am,
more...
sir. So we can either do breakouts or we can do Q&A and close up. It's your call.
Let's do breakouts. Yeah, let's break out from the break up, and it'll probably give you about 15 minutes. Well, let me ask this: are there any questions for Eric? Because I'll probably dismiss from the breakout rooms. Any questions for in here before we go?
Yeah, I got one. Eric, do you have any, as you're getting to know all this, do you have any ideas for a rhythm for DCN? Like a good starting point? Like once a month, you know, what they normally do in the cities?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. You know, honestly, I'd probably have to look under the hood to see more of what you guys are already doing. And then I'd probably have to ask a lot of questions and try to understand how you're building community among your platforms. What's working, what's not working, what's been effective in the past that isn't working now, you've made adjustments on. It's funny, like the relational rhythms that we have for our networks now and for the movements now, even what I'm giving you on those slide decks, like across the globe, they're all over the place, because you can imagine context and cultures can be a lot different, especially in some of our majority world places where relationship and trumps goes way over like calendars and people's schedules, where people are more people focused in their schedules, not calendar focused, if that makes sense. So I think the relational rhythms are probably much higher in those contexts than what we're even talking about on these slide decks. I wish I could give you like a straight answer on that, Chris. That's a great question, though. I do want to figure that out because I think it'd be really fun. And my guess is it'll be very diverse for you guys, depending upon what platform we're talking about.
What I'm sensing, though, even some of the isolation, more so that everyone on this call and in the network can really feel that, you know, I know in the Kansas City barbecue, it's just so good to see the mountain men and women. You know, it's like a mountain men meeting. I don't mean to be singularly gender about that. I'm just saying we're coming in all beat up and, coming in and patching each other's wounds and then going back out again once a month, more than the content that's being offered at that meeting. So locally, that's what happens in KC, at least my experience. Though the content's good, so I don't know. So I was just shooting about your way to see what, that could look like.
Yeah.
You get to at least get the file going, to get like a rhythm going to, what happens when this ends, how can we keep the fire kind of stirring a bit? So,
I mean, the way we came up with these relational rhythms really is about taking the time to listen to leaders like you and processing with you what makes sense in your particular context. So it would be a fun exercise for Jeff and team, and Patrick and I can serve in that too. It's like, what relational rhythms are making sense to your context? Now let's try some things based on what we're hearing from you. And then let's figure out how to scale that out to other leaders who are like you. That would be super fun to figure out together.
I love that.
It seems like an important part.
Yeah. Where are you guys? Where are the bottlenecks with whatever? And let's pull together on that. Okay. That's good. Thank you.
Yep. By the way, GLC, their global leadership community, is for me, it's an incredible experience. It's one of my favorite things that I do. If for no other reason than the huge global reach of this, and I find myself listening and learning from people outside of my U.S. context. So it's been very influential and very impactful. So we put those in DCN, and so you can see those, and we'll communicate to those in the future, but I would encourage you all to be a part of that, just to log in for the hour or so if it makes sense to you. By the way, I think Jason Poling from Cornerstone VR is speaking at the next one on multiplying churches in virtual reality. So that's a thing. Kind of love the fact that new things like, hey, yeah, digital meta, go for it. So yeah, we'll be featuring him in the next one. Cool. Any other questions before we break up? Cool. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to push the magic button. We'll break up for 15 minutes, and then you guys can go from there. Here's what I would love to talk through. Hey, so now we're getting a better picture. We're understanding what the networks are, the contextualization, being friends on mission, attracting people in, finding the person of peace in the context, working with the churches that we're providing, that DCN is going to be providing to you as well. What does your network look like through this? Who are some people that you know that would want to be a part of this? Are you starting to get a picture of what you could be, what you could accomplish by running this network? Let's spend some time here starting to formulate maybe some goals or some dreams, or what's the new thing? It's like the dream on the napkin. If you can write your dream on an app, I don't know that spiel yet. Totally, I haven't adopted that. But the part of I'm failing at this right now. It's COVID brain for today. Every failure is on COVID. It's all day. But what dream can you accomplish by this? What could your dream look like through it? And let's start to maybe vocalize that and start to talk that through. So spend some time. We'll break up for 15 minutes. And you know what? I'll just leave the room open. So take some time, talk through this, set up prayer time, maybe pray at the end, and we'll just go ahead and dismiss from the breakout rooms. Next week, we'll be back here for session 3. It'll be Patrick and Eric both together, I believe. That is what we said, right? Yeah, okay. It's Patrick and Eric both together for that, and then it'll be the last training session from there. Okay? All right, so what's your network look like? Who maybe wants to be a part of this? Have you thought that far through? Oh, and by the way, Clarine has invited us all to South Africa because evidently the rand is much less expensive than the dollar. So we're all going to go party in South Africa. So let's make that happen. Okay? Maybe. Kidding. Maybe. But for today,
Cape Town is beautiful.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. My parents have been multiple times. They've done mission trips down there in Cape Town, but not me. I paid for other people to go, but that's another conversation. So we're going to break up. What does your network look like? Maybe who are you inviting into this? Let me push some magic buttons, and you all are good to go. Thank you.